everybody was working remotely, but we were building a product that didn't enable any of that. And it just seemed to be really crazy.
Meet Sumit, Chief Product Officer at Elevate.io, whose pre-YouTube startup ended up on Nasdaq and is now on a mission to end production hell with collaborative video editing.
I can't believe it's actually taken 20 years to get to where we are today. The next 5 years will literally supersede everything that's happened up until today. Production companies lose a huge amount of profit to the inefficiencies of their customers. And here's the funny thing about it. People aren't paying for your time, they're paying for... The biggest myth about collaborative video is that it's going to be chaos. It's not, it's the absolute opposite.
Will AI replace editors?
Welcome to the What the Fuck Happened podcast. I'm Tom.
And I'm Sam, and we're co-hosts of this podcast.
We talk to leaders in the marketing world and lift the lid on what success truly is.
And it's all about that moment of chaos that breeds success.
With every episode, we'll be speaking to new guests, diving into the what the fuck happened moments that shaped them.
And we're interested in the fine, gritty details. No story is a straight line, no journey is a straight line, and the squiggle is something we're going to ask every guest to draw out at the end. So, Sumit, welcome to the What the Fuck Happened podcast.
Thank you.
The WTF Happened podcast for the algorithm, just making sure the swear words don't cut us off.
What the fuck happened there?
This podcast is all about the sort of personal journey, but it's also about where you're at today and what you're doing. And you are the Chief Product Officer at Elevate.io. You've had a pretty interesting career path, and we are going to talk about what you're doing today and what the future may mean for you. But I think the interesting thing for us to always start at is your past and what brought you to where you are today. And we start that with a moment of chaos in your life that happened that you can now look back on with a certain amount of positivity, and it's a sort of silver lining, but a turning point in your life. Do you have that WTF moment in mind?
I do. It was really what was the beginning of Elevate.io. Before I was working on a video editing product, it was really at the height of COVID. So everybody was, the team was in Wisconsin, was in London, Newcastle, Berlin, and Dresden. And so naturally, everybody at that moment was forced into working collaboratively. So, the code was all being checked in through Microsoft Azure. The conversations were all happening over Teams. The collaboration on the design side was all in Figma. Everybody was working remotely, but we were building a product that didn't enable any of that. And it just seemed to be really crazy that every tool around us was about collaboration and working remotely and accessibility from everywhere, whilst the tool that we were building meant that you had to be fixed on one computer at a time. And at the end of that project, it was a great project, it was a great release, but it did make me think, hold on, we're missing something in this.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, it's so much of so many of the tools we're working with today are offering that collaboration. And I think the fact that that's what you're building in this space that has been very isolated is really interesting. But I want to go back a bit. How did you end up working in this kind of space? Did you grow up with filmmaking and video? Is that something that's sort of in your blood?
It is. It all started probably when I was about 12 years of age. My grandfather used to work for Alan Blumlein, the gentleman who invented stereo sound and high definition television and radar during the war. So naturally, summers for me were being lectured by my grandfather on how video works. And I remember it so vividly, him explaining satellite transmission, which to him was new at the time in the sort of mid-90s. And it sparked this real interest and this real excitement around, how video works and how television works and how film works. And that just sort of led on to working or taking up video production at school, to then ending up essentially working in Soho. And I worked for Floella Benjamin Productions, which was a children's TV company. I worked for WTN in news. And it was at that really interesting moment where video had historically been the sort of first generation, as we call it. It had all been tape-based. And there was the second generation. It was the Avid era. It was the offline era. It was the idea that actually we can use computers to make this work better. And it was a great time to be in the industry because nobody in the video industry understood computers, and computer people didn't understand video. So coming in at a young age was actually a really great opportunity to get into that. And what then proceeded for me, other than ending up working as a CTO at a film company, at a post-production company, but for me the real interest then became towards IP video. And that was my real sort of view of like, hold on, television's great, it's amazing, you've got satellite transmissions, it's a worldwide phenomenon now, but it's complicated. And there's this other thing over there, the internet, which is like now available on becoming available on devices everywhere. And so in 2002, I founded a company, Kudu Valley, with some friends of mine that were at university together. We'd all studied computer science. And what we decided was that actually we need to build video distribution over IP networks. This was 4 years before YouTube. It was actually at the real infancy. And the market that we found that was most set and ready to go was finance. They had the networks in place. They had the reason to communicate. Already communication was sort of beholden to when maybe Bloomberg or CNBC or one of the big news networks want to talk to them, but they could create their own video channel. They could create their own, what we now would call a YouTube channel. And so we built out that product and that company, and eventually it was acquired in 2014 by a Nasdaq company, Kumu, and it still lives on today as powering a lot of a lot of big companies. A lot of the Forbes 500 companies are powered with that technology. And at the time we sold the company, actually our biggest customer was Apple, and we did all of their live distribution over the online store.
It's interesting, that sort of evolution of the technology that backs up the creative process, right? It feels like every generation has its sort of next step in the democratization of storytelling when it comes to video. And I guess that's a good point to get into Elevate.io, because Elevate.io is trying to force that next step or offer that next step. So can you give me an idea of, what is the core problem that you're solving with Elevate.io?
So I think there are two aspects to this. One is a technical one and a logistical one, which we're very strong in. But if I even go back a little bit to my history, in that because I started in ultimately video in a drama sense, so it was film, it was children's TV, which is unbelievably drama based because of the sort of rules and regulations around how you do it. Storytelling has always been at the key. So to me, the technology, I've always been on the technology side. I'm not creative enough or obviously in front of the camera normally, except for today. But what I realized was that these are tools for storytellers. This is what the technical side of video production is. And so in building Elevate, there's a couple of things that we've absolutely wanted to keep at the core to it. It is in the vein of some of the other great products in the space that maybe started with Avid, and other great companies have built out tools which were designed for storytellers. So for us, things that are really important are the fidelity of the timeline, the way in which someone can actually pull their edit together. And that you're not seeing in a lot of modern tools. Modern tools are very functional. But for us, it was really actually, how do we make that timeline fluid? How do we make it feel like I'm actually crafting something? I'm using an easel that I really find easy to use. And then the other side, and the big part of Elevate was, where we've had that first generation I mentioned with tape, we've had the second generation with Avid, the third generation, which is really the majority of what's going on at the moment. It's the Final Cuts, it's the Premieres, and it's the DaVinci. It's all the power in the world, but on one machine. And the fourth generation for us is collaboration and the whole thing running out of the cloud. So we're really trying to marry together the creative element and the creative freedom to tell a story, to build something, mixed in with that accessibility, the collaboration, the cloud-based element to it all.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess one of the interesting questions for me is that that offering expanding who your users could be, right? Because there's a barrier to entry that has been more and more opened up as these technologies grow and more people can get a bit of software. DaVinci Resolve used to be 40K, right, as a piece of software. And now these things are available on a subscription basis, and that gives more people the option to be like, actually, I can afford testing my hand at this. How do you now define that user base? Because you're obviously looking at experienced editors as users for Elevate.io, but it also opens that opportunity for other creators.
That's exactly right. The explosion of video in the last 15 years is just phenomenal. I think it wasn't even just YouTube or just Insta or just even the expansion of the satellite networks. It's been used in training a lot more. It's been used in classrooms. It's slowly grown, and where the original tools were designed really for film, television, weddings. Was a huge market back in the day, and the occasional hobbyist, sort of middle-aged dad with his camcorder. That was pretty much all video was. But now, because it is such a successful format, it's such a efficient format, it's such a compelling format, far greater than written word, not to negate written word, but it obviously has a lot of advantages, especially when it comes to training and conveying really detailed and important information. We've seen this explosion, not just the YouTubers with niche subjects like woodworking and other tutorials that go online. There's the whole blow up of Coursera and all of the video tutorials that people can subscribe to. Schools use video significantly more than they did in our era. We see it used a lot in training, in medical. We see it used in finance. And so all of a sudden, something that was just the domain of film and television and weddings is now actually just like PowerPoint. PowerPoint has a very similar trajectory where it was a tool originally. Slides were a tool made by the artist or the graphics department, and it became on the desktop of every business person as a business tool to structure their presentations. And we feel like video is following the same way. We feel like the amount of people who now actually use and create video as part of their day-to-day job when they're not a video editor, it's just huge. And so building the right tools that support that new world, and nothing against the current tools are all designed for film and television. I know, I worked on them. We cared more about absolute pixel accuracy of the nth degree, and we cared a lot about visual effects. Well, the new world doesn't care so much about that. What they care about is the accessibility, the ease to collaborate, the reduced production timeline, because video, it does take longer to make than traditional content. So all of the things that now the new world and the new users care about are a lot of the emphasis on what we're working on.
It's interesting you mentioned that sort of transition from text to image to moving image, and they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, maybe a video is worth 100,000. But I guess with that desire to create or tell stories or disseminate information through video, as you say, it's a more complicated process than writing a blog. Or I guess what people really need today is two other things: is speed to create these things so it's not redundant by the time it's actually produced, and collaboration, because there are normally more than one person involved in creating these things. And I think that's part of your proposition, right?
It is. Traditionally, as I said, video is can be quite complex, and it can take time to produce. And the only way that it becomes an effective communication medium for a marketing team or an internal communications team is if they can actually produce that content quickly. And one of the things that, because collaboration is such a big emphasis in what we do, partly because we'd seen how much it had sped up day-to-day design of the product. We use Figma to design our products, and I have in the last few companies that I've worked in, and it's cut down so much of the red tape and so much of that slow linear cycle. And what we had called in video production hell, which is where you get the first bit of the project actually goes quite quickly, and then you end up in this awful loop of trying to do approvals, getting people to look at it, collating all of that feedback in one go, trying to make another release, and you end up with a lot of people specifying we do 3 rounds of reviews. It's not what's appropriate. It's 3 rounds because we've got to put some structure around this. And actually what we've done is developed a system whereby on an ongoing basis, within real time, you can make those changes, see those instant viewings, because we have the instant review tool. You don't have to export it, upload it to another website, collate all that feedback, and then figure out what were they talking about, which edit were they talking about. The whole thing happens live, and it's very akin to how documents with Google Docs or Office 365, how much faster they get produced than the old days of write the document, print it out, put it in the post, redline it, and then that loop, which is very linear, has been completely replaced by a real-time system. And that efficiency means that people can actually shoot something in the morning, edit it, maybe over a 24-hour period that goes to the different stakeholders, and the thing can get finished. Whereas that could have taken a week before.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that sort of potential disruption of a current process for people who are editing, but may look at this offering and actually make a move to change some of the ways they work. Before we do that, I just wanted to talk more about potentially new users who may come onto your platform less informed about video editing and the process of video editing, and how they can quite quickly ramp up on the Elevate.io platform to learn editing in quite a soft and intuitive way.
We've been at a few events recently, ranging from marketing events to regular business events to sporting events. And so we've been showcasing Elevate in front of a lot of people who may not have expected that day to be seeing video editing software. And when we see people who are wanting to get into it or are new to it, there's a couple of interesting observations. One, when we start talking about the collaboration and the web-based element, the fact that it runs out of Google Chrome on any machine, from a Chromebook through to a fully loaded Mac, they're almost like they would expect that, because that's how everything else works that they do. So they don't see that we've even had the exact phrase, isn't that how they all work? And so new users are actually the easiest people. They're the easiest adopters of this. The other nice compliments we've had from users who have seen it is, I already know how to use this. And so maybe they've come from Canva, maybe they've done some work in Figma, they instantly understand it. New users have an easier time onboarding into Elevate than people who have a lot of entrenched belief in how things should be done, or how things have been historically done. I mean, that pattern we see in lots of aspects of life. And so when we were actually building out Elevate and we did the focus groups with the different groups of people, we did find students were the first and the quickest to understand, okay, this is just how this version of the tool works. They did have some knowledge, of course, of video, but they were instantly, I get it, it's a collaborative version of what we already use. The most difficult group were the ones who were most entrenched in the traditional workflows, whether it's high-end visual effects or Avid-based style program making, documentaries or film. And for them, what was the most fascinating bit was some of the comments, which ranged from, if my name's on the credit reel, I don't want someone in my timeline, and that's going to be chaos, and there's a lot of fear. And when we talk to them about how they structure their production, it was always, we use Google Docs so we can all collaborate. I'm like, okay, so if someone's not going to trash the call sheet, why would they trash the edit? And of course, as anyone who's used Figma or Canva knows, there is that initial, oh my God, it's going to be chaos. And it actually turns into, no, everyone falls in line. I mean, putting 5 people in an office together, you don't expect a punch up. Like, why would there be one on the timeline? We did try 25 people in Elevate as a technical test, and it was chaos. And there is a point with which it doesn't make any sense. But that's that's obviously not a realistic use case. And most of those are engineers, so they were really trying to break it, which was the whole purpose of it. But when we have used it ourselves within our own marketing team, and when we've observed the different teams who have gone full in with Elevate, what we see is a real good mix of real time, okay, let's jump in together and do this, or asynchronous, I'm working a bit on it. Oh, I've done my bit. Can you take a look at it? Someone else jumps on it. And that for us works globally as well. We have people in New York who edit stuff that's been shot in London and vice versa. And so it also helps sort of get rid of those location barriers, because of course the whole thing is stored in the cloud, so you don't have to be physically in the same domain. But it also has helped us with that asynchronous nature of content creation.
And I think, we touched on speed being such an important part of content creation these days. Those users who are already working from their workflow, they know what the process is, they're communicating with clients, you'll get that first draft in a week's time, and then it'll take 2 or 3 weeks to go through V2, V3, V4. We'll give you 48 hours to get all your stakeholders and have a look and feedback in probably an email, even though you want it on that. That real challenge is to ask the question of can you do this better, to creators and production companies, right? And I can speak from experience. We're a production company, Dojo Films, and we work on those workflows. We work a lot quicker than other people, and that's why people use us. But it's still based on that idea of creating, as you say, the file and uploading it to a review panel. How do you see that that obstacle of challenging the current status quo and getting people to test case it and be like, well, what if your stakeholder was right here at this time when you've just finished the edit?
I think some of it just happens naturally. I don't think you should plan it or script it. It's like taking an Uber for the first time. It just sort of, there's a bit of apprehension. And then once you've done it, you're like, okay, well, I know how to do this now. I'm never going to not know how to do this. To answer your question about production companies lose a huge amount of profit to the inefficiencies of their customers. That, having worked obviously in production companies and worked with a lot of them.
That resonates for me.
Yeah, and, even when we use external providers, the process ends up costing, the cost is not on the client side. It ends up being on it. And this is the same for building works. It's the same for a lot of things in life. And here's the funny thing about it. People aren't paying for your time. They're paying for the output. So you could even charge them more to do it faster. That's common pattern in things outside of video editing. People will pay for things to be expedited. What they want is it sooner. They don't want to pay you and then for you to take your time with it. That doesn't, unless you're, commissioning a work of art that you just decide that you just want it to take 3 years for the sake of it. Actually, the truth is that people will pay you more if you are faster, and you will make more profit because you will be spending less time ultimately. And that's the cost, especially in a production company. Time is the cost.
Take me through a bit of the experience. Obviously, we're in a podcast format. We don't have a screen in front of us, but if I am logging on to Elevate.io in order to work on a creative project, I may have a collaborator and I want to invite a client on. What's the sort of rhythms of that process?
So let's take it from the top. You would fire up your browser on any computer from a Chromebook onwards. You sign up to Elevate.io. You can sign in with Google or your own credentials. You immediately have a workspace. You don't have to install any software. You don't have to profile your computer. You can now immediately start uploading content, or you could go into our stock library to pull down some stock content, or use, for example, our AI generation to build a storyboard. So pre-visualizing your project, let's say. Then maybe it gets shot in a studio like this, and it's been shot in the traditional H.264 or broadcasting formats. They can all be uploaded as files directly into the product. What we do then is we create a proxy version of that, which makes it run over the internet very well. But we store all the originals for the later, final export. You could then put together your edit. You could import graphics that have come from somewhere else or use any of our graphic tools. You could do some color correction. We have a whole looks library so that you could apply a number of LUTs to your project. But then it gets to the point where you say, okay, before we even get to the client, maybe we need your partner Tom to look at it because he's really good. Like, just to take a look at this edit. Now he's already in your team in the product, so he becomes a very easy share add, and he'll see it anyway because he's in your team, so he could just jump in to the project. But you may invite him. He gets an email. He clicks on it. Again, no installation. Maybe he's on the road, so he's in an internet cafe or he's somewhere else. He's using someone else's computer. He instantly can access that project. Because of the proxy that we create, even if he is in another part of the world, he'll be able to view the edit and make his cuts, and the whole thing will run very smoothly. So at that point, he could leave some comments for you. You'll get notifications. Maybe you jump in on it together to look at it. And then at the point with which you're like, you know what, this is worth us now putting in front of a customer or the client. Let's get their feedback on where we are, because everybody loves that first cut. That first cut, and I know from commissioning videos myself, it's the best cut. Even if it's not finished, it's always the most exciting one because it's where you see it for the first time. So let's not delay that process. And you can invite someone into the project who's outside of the team. So they can't see the rest of your projects or the rest of your media. But what they will do is get the link. There again, could be on any computer. They'll load up because it's a reviewer link. They're seeing a very cut down interface, which is essentially just the video and the ability to comment on it. But what's even better is if they happen to be on a call with you at the same time, they could actually follow you and you could say, okay, let's play that bit back again. And they'll be viewing it as if they were in the old days, sat in an edit suite, and there was the Puntervision TV and there was the couch in the corner, and they were viewing it as the client, and you were the editor on the, behind the two big Trinitron screens. And you would just see that live. They would just see it live and they could say, okay, great. I've seen the first edit. These are my thoughts. Maybe they, again, are done over a call, or they're looking at it overnight. So they leave just comments in the timeline. You as the editor can pick it up, see those comments, action the changes, and immediately the link will still be full of the new changes now. So you can just message them, right, take a look now. Like, we've made the changes. We don't need to export something, upload it, go through any other process. And that's what we really want to kill. And everyone, when we're working with people and designing the product, people really want to push does it have version numbers? Because we all know what happens in traditional video production. You end up with final, very, very final, final 4. Definitely this is the final. There's just none of that. The same way that doesn't exist in Figma. You just have the live working document. And that freaks people out. Oh, there's no, and we are building in, version history and some ability to roll back for good reasons, because there are sometimes when things go wrong and you need to go, let's just go back. But when people work on the current live document, life just moves faster. It just moves quicker. It's more efficient. It's actually of a higher quality. Having and introducing that checkpoints and the versioning actually is a big part of that slowdown and that inefficiency that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to talk about some of the features, like having the versioning, but still concentrating on this live version. That's the important sort of factor of progress. It'd be great to speak about some of the features you're going to be adding and the evolution of this powerful tool. But are there some aha moments you've had in the build phase of building this tool, and like what's been the biggest sort of jump that you've suddenly been like, right, now we're cooking?
Yeah, it has taken a while to build out. Naturally, we started the project 3 years ago. There's a lot of things. We were lucky because the company that owns Elevate.io, Blackbird, has a huge experience in some of the world's biggest sporting events. So the core video engine, Hummingbird, has come out of a really tried and tested infrastructure, let's say. That's a massive advantage to us. We didn't have to reinvent the way that we store and manage video and compress it, and all of that, luckily, we inherited. Our job in the last 3 years has been to actually craft that into something that the average person can use and not a newsroom editor. So for us, what's really come along in that way is like, well, there were unknowns. Like, are we really going to be able to make this timeline as fluid as using a fully loaded, tricked out Mac Pro running the latest versions of Final Cut, which happens to run very well on a Mac? And actually the experience that we got to was really, really fluid. And then it was like, okay, can the timeline scale? Because that's something that all of the other online video editors just fail with. You can't make a project longer than 10 minutes. For us, it was like, well, we need to be able to make a full feature movie on this. Can we load the timeline with hundreds of clips? Can we move around it efficiently? And there's some quite interesting problems to solve there technically. And we've moved them forward. So a lot of the early years have been spent actually putting in place infrastructure and not necessarily glossy features. But we're now at the point where we've been in the market, we've been testing the market, we've been going through finding our ICP, we've been really in that investigative phase before we go to our ramp up phase. And as part of the ramp up, that's when the glossy features come in. But we had to get the foundation and the fact that at its heart, this thing runs, it's efficient, it scales well. And now the good things come. And the biggest thing, I think, that the opportunity that we have is, as I mentioned before, all the traditional tools are designed for film and television. So all of the many great, amazing companies that build visual effects plugins are worrying about lens flares. They're worrying about lightning bolts. They're worrying about color correction. They're worrying about light leaks. But actually, the people who are making content today, it could be education, it could be sporting. So we see a great opportunity with our marketplace and the marketplace concept that we're introducing, where not only ourselves, but third parties could actually build plugins that work in Elevate that actually work for other industries. Sporting is a good example where a lot of people who have a Garmin watch get telemetrics out of it. If you're on a bike ride or you're skiing or you're snowboarding or something, well, we could have someone build, either we could or a third party could build a plugin that just takes the Garmin Fit data, overlays it on top of the video, and all of a sudden you've got a head-up display synchronized with your video. And it's very popular, obviously, with GoPros and DJI cameras. People are filming a lot of their own, especially when it comes to cycling and skiing and things like this. So you look at an education and you think, well, right now for somebody, or even in finance, if somebody was to try and rebuild a graph in video, it's the same process that every production company goes through. Someone does it in Excel. You take a screen grab, someone traces it in After Effects, it gets outlined, it gets animated. The whole thing can take days to animate a simple graph. But actually, we could have a graphing plugin and we could just throw data into that and immediately have that visualized. Again, making it easier for people to actually produce quality content without having to go to the nth degree. And we believe that the tools that exist in the market today are still what you would use if you were building a Hollywood movie. And Elevate's not aimed at that market. But if you're a marketing team, a corporate communications team, an educator, a YouTuber, a regular content creator for Insta, actually, we're going to be making tools that make that process more efficient.
And I guess you're not targeting Hollywood filmmakers, but you are trying to help the users who are currently able to do this level of production, especially in post, and elevate them towards that level of production that people with the best tools and the best cameras and everything can create. And I guess that's the point. So I guess plugins, integrations, that's a big part of your growth journey as well. Giving more tools for storytelling, not for, tools' sake. It's in order to give more ability to tell your story without the faff, as you say, 3 days trying to animate a graph. Is that a big focus now?
It is. I mean, because we're in the cloud already, we immediately have access to other cloud services. So we've been able to very easily embed stock footage. We are working on audio files. We're working on, obviously, other AI components, where we're leveraging the engines from other companies. And what it means is that where traditional tools, it's very, very hard to get the content out of traditional tools. That's the nature of them. The content sits in the computer itself, and it's very hard to export it. Whereas with us, because the content is already in the cloud, it's already there, the explosion of being able to utilize AI services, other processing services, other offline capabilities. And at the moment, it is infancy with us, and it's not necessarily any faster than a desktop. However, just imagine you're running a really complex, really high-end chroma key in the future on something that's sat in Elevate. In the future, we'll be able to leverage far more compute power because we'll be in the cloud and we'll have access to potentially an unlimited number of machines with GPUs. Whereas even a fully loaded Mac desktop obviously has a physical limit. So we do see that the future for cloud-based editing, not just us, it will be others, will actually be technically faster. You'll have access to a lot more compute behind the scenes. We've seen exactly the same pattern happen in trading rooms in banks. They used to have very high-powered workstations with multiple screens for the big traders. Now, all of that they just have thin VDUs and all of the compute is in the data center. It's exactly the same paradigm. Why would you want to force all of your capability into one machine on a desktop when potentially you have access to an unlimited amount of compute in the cloud?
So what is that sort of pie in the sky, long-term, North Star, all the buzzwords? What's that mission in the future? Where is Elevate headed?
First off, I think we want Elevate to just feel very obvious and simple to users. We just like the way that when people have adopted Canva or Figma, there's just a lot less drama than there is the traditional tools from other providers. It's actually it just becomes another one of your, this is what we use. So we actually want it to be conveniently very lightweight. We want it to just be the tool that, guess what? Oh, we need to produce video content. Well, we can just jump into Elevate and we can do it. And if I need some help, I can add someone. And if we need some extra assets, they're available within it. We want it to feel very, very intuitive and very it was a cliche to say user friendly, but genuinely it's got to be usable by anybody who's a competent computer user. And that even tools like PowerPoint have mastered, they ultimately are usable by a very wide range of people compared to the alternative of making slides. And so where we've seen that, okay, the higher end products are going almost more niche. They're almost becoming harder to use for the average person. We see that the 80% in the middle of the market, we're not worried about the lowest end of the market, and we're not worried about that Hollywood end of the market, which even if we said it's 10% on either side, it's not. I mean, Hollywood is now 0.001% of the actual video production that goes on. So, but let's just say it's the top 10% of filmmakers and the bottom 10%. We're not interested in that. There's that 80% in the middle who want the quality of the high end, but genuinely using 5% of the time to create it.
Well, Sumit, I'm really excited about Elevate.io as a storytelling tool for my purposes and Dojo's purposes. I'm really excited to see how the tool evolves to be even stronger. I think you've explained it so well, but what I do want to go back to you, and we always do this thing in the WTF Happened podcast, which I haven't warned you about, which is we actually have part of the Dojo logo is a squiggle. And it started off being a squiggle when we were just messing about with logos and seeing what looked cool. It's kind of like our Nike swoosh. But I think it resonated in the logo because it's a sort of non-linear, non-straight line. And it kind of, for us, represented the creative journey, right? And maybe with Elevate, that gets less squiggly because it's just a sort of straight upwards line, for post-production at least anyway. But I want to transport that idea of the squiggle and for you to draw out your career in a sort of squiggle with the ups and the downs, because it's really interesting to see, you mentioned your moment during COVID of this sort of thing you thought could be built with your colleagues, and obviously you've been working on that for ages since and come a long way. But you've also in the past built and exited a company, which it takes a lot of doing as well. So I just wanted you to draw out your squiggle and explain what's going on through your career.
It's going to sound ridiculous. If I'd have known 20 years ago, we'd only be where we are today, I'd actually think that was a bit disappointing. And that sounds a bit weird because it's been action-packed and the whole world has changed in that period of time. But I remember 20 years ago, literally, it was up in our office for a long time. I'd written on the whiteboard to put video on the internet. And it took a long time to actually do that. When I started in my career, it was easier to make a satellite transmission from Newman Street to Japan than it was to just capture a file and put it on a Dropbox and send someone a link. So at the same time, like I said, the promise was there really early. I really believed from a very early point in my career that, hold on, this stuff has just got to become easier. It's just got to become quicker. And in many ways, the cost has definitely happened. The beginning of my career, everything was in digibeta at the high end. Cameras, just the camera block was 60,000. Lenses were, name your price. It was anything from 15,000 to hundreds of thousands. Microphones were, the whole thing was incredibly expensive, where you compare it to a podcast studio like this, where the whole thing, all the tech in here could be bought for under 5,000, pounds. So the cost has come down, but actually I still don't think we've had a glimpse of what can be. And when YouTube came about, it was the best thing that happened for my company because it popularized. At first we were very worried, but actually we were focusing on the corporate sector. So it actually made it easier because we had a reference point, which was YouTube. But the bit that I really hope continues and I really want to see happen with video is that all the opportunities of video get to play out because the tools are there. So the person who wants to show somebody how to make clay bowls doesn't have this, oh my God, I've got to learn to be a filmmaker. Actually, they can step into that role very, very easily. Education, I don't think video is even used a fraction as much. We've had some great examples. The Khan Academy about 15 years ago started this idea of how could we educate more people? Well, we now know that we live in a world where, certainly when I went to university in the late 90s, there was no way that the content could be accessible for somebody in a rural developing country. That was just not possible. Now there's absolutely no reason, and video provides such a big part of that. So I don't think if I answered your question exactly right, other than I can't believe it's actually taken 20 years to get to where we are today. I do believe that the next 5 years, it's hard for us to imagine because already in the last 15 years, the amount of video created has exploded. But I think the next 5 years will literally supersede everything that's happened up until today. But, in terms of quantity, in terms of accessibility, the next 5 years will just, and that follows the traditional paradigm of technology in general.
For me, educational video content was probably the geography teacher putting on Dante's Peak because they couldn't be asked to do the lesson. That was the extent of video being able to enhance education. I'm sure it's much easier to use video and educational content today as well. But so we'll leave it there. I really appreciate your time and excited to see what happens next with Elevate.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the What the Fuck Happened podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to listen to more, subscribe to our channel. We look forward to seeing you the next one. What the fuck happened there?